no board of directors in the world would hire someone with so little experience to run a large business, much less the Department of Defense, where American lives are on the line regularly. For this reason, in addition to some concerns we had about character, I ultimately opposed your nomination. And unfortunately, my reservations have become reality. I know my colleagues have touched on some of these issues, but to briefly summarize, you have failed to set the example, or lead from the front, as you like to say. And this includes prompting a leadership and oversight vacuum at the department by firing qualified uniformed leaders without cause, creating loyalty tests and leak investigations that have led to 5 of your senior advisors resigning or being fired, sharing classified military details on an unsecured app during operations in Yemen that included unauthorized individuals on at least 2 separate occasions, and revoking the DoD personal protection detail for both Secretary of Defense Mark Esper and the former Chairman of Joint Chiefs Mark Milley, putting their safety at risk while they are still under threat from Iran. We have seen
what happens when the very leadership of our military, the guardians of American strength and freedom, gets caught between 2 starkly different visions of service. On one hand, you have General Kane pledging to remain apolitical, grounded in the Constitution, and devoted to servant leadership. On the other hand, you have Secretary Hegseth, accused of violating trust, undermining readiness, and even leaking sensitive information on unsecured apps during military operations. The clash is as clear as night and day, and it has profound consequences for the safety of our troops and the security of this nation. This hearing isn't just about leadership styles. It's about whether America will stand strong with discipline, accountability, and principle, or crumble under weakness, negligence, and betrayal of trust. Welcome to America Viewpoint, where we speak the truth, defend our freedoms, and fight for the values that made this nation great. No censorship, no woke spin, just bold, unfiltered commentary from real Americans who love this country. If you're tired of the lies and ready to stand for faith, family, and freedom, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the Liberty Bell, because this is where the fight begins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Kane, both before and during your confirmation hearing, we discussed your commitment to duty and to adhering to the Constitution, as well as your oath of office. And I certainly appreciated your reassurance that you will remain, quote, a nonpartisan leader through and through, unquote, with one of your top priorities being maintaining the independence of the U.S. military. Along with remaining apolitical, I'm sure you will agree that fostering a stable, mission-focused environment is essential to leading the Department of Defense. So my question for you, sir, is can you please share with this committee and the American people what your approach to leadership as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is?
Yes, sir. It's certainly the job is one to understand the global set of challenges, integrate the options that must be considered, and then to present those options to the president. And I've always taken a servant leadership approach throughout my career based on my oath of office and the Constitution and my commission.
And as a nonpartisan leader, you reiterate that?
Always, yeah, I reiterate that.
Well, thank you. And as a former lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy Reserve, I certainly agree with that and agree with your answers and your commitment to the men and women in uniform. Secretary Hegseth, your approach to leadership, I believe, stands in direct conflict with the ideas that we just discussed with General Kane. And at a time of great chaos and uncertainty in the world, I'm extremely concerned that your many shortcomings could have potentially life-threatening consequences for American service members. In your confirmation hearing, I expressed my deep reservations about your qualifications to run the DoD. I also made it clear that no board of directors in the world would hire someone with so little experience to run a large business, much less the Department of Defense, where American lives are on the line regularly. For this reason, in addition to some concerns we had about character, I ultimately opposed your nomination. And unfortunately, my reservations have become reality. I know my colleagues have touched on some of these issues, but to briefly summarize, you have failed to set the example, or lead from the front, as you like to say. And this includes prompting a leadership and oversight vacuum at the department by firing qualified uniformed leaders without cause, creating loyalty tests and leak investigations that have led to 5 of your senior advisors resigning or being fired, sharing classified military details on an unsecure app during operations in Yemen that included unauthorized individuals on at least 2 separate occasions, and revoking the DoD personal protection detail for both Secretary of Defense Mark Esper and the former Chairman of Joint Chiefs Mark Milley, putting their safety at risk while they are still under threat from Iran. We have seen time and time again how your conduct, lack of personal responsibility, are harming readiness, reputation, and professionalism of our military. At a time where Israel and Iran are in open conflict and our adversaries in Russia and China will exploit any weaknesses, unfortunately, my worst fears about your leadership shortfalls, unfortunately, have been realized. Secretary Hegseth, I firmly believe that accountability from leadership is vital in all sectors, not just in the military. And demonstrating to your subordinates that everyone plays by the same rules helps to build trust and open communications within your team. And those two things are extremely important. And I know that you share my desire to ensure that we're holding our senior leaders accountable for actions. And during your nomination hearing, you stated, quote, accountability is coming because everybody in this room knows if you are a rifleman and you lose your rifle, they are throwing the book at you, end of quote. You also said that leadership has been unwilling to take accountability, and I couldn't agree more on how important accountability is. As we all know, at the request of this committee, the Department of Defense Inspector General launched an investigation into your use of Signal, an unclassified commercially available messaging application to discuss information pertaining military actions in Yemen. So given your focus on accountability, how will you demonstrate this accountability to the men and women in the U.S. military if the Inspector General finds that you improperly disclosed information?
That assessment is pending at this time.
That is a hypothetical question, but the gentleman's time has expired.
I think your answer is clear. You are not going to be held accountable.
Thank you very much, Senator Peters.
The hearing opened with a simple but powerful reminder. Every leader in uniform swears an oath, not to a president, not to a political party, but to the Constitution of the United States. That's what General Kane emphasized. He said his leadership as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff will be defined by servant leadership, by presenting options to the president, grounded in duty, while staying absolutely nonpartisan. Think about how rare that is in today's climate. A man in uniform at the very top of our military hierarchy, reaffirming that he serves not politicians, not ideologies, but the Constitution. That's exactly what every patriot in this country should demand. Why is this so important? Because once the military becomes politicized, freedom itself is at risk. A military that plays political games is no longer a shield for liberty. It becomes a weapon for tyranny. That's why Kane's words matter. He's saying, I will not be a pawn. I will not bend to politics. I will serve the nation, the Constitution, and the men and women in uniform. That's leadership rooted in honor. Congressman Peters, who once wore the uniform himself as a Navy Reserve officer, backed Kane's commitment. He said he agreed with Kane's nonpartisan servant leadership style. That shared bond, service to country above self, is what gives credibility. When veterans in Congress hear a general commit to those values, it resonates because they know what it means to take that oath. Let me ask you, my fellow Americans, isn't this what we want from our top military leaders? Clarity, commitment, stability. Someone who says, politics stops here. The Constitution leads here. That's the foundation of a strong and stable defense. But then, the tone of the hearing shifted. Peters turned from praising Kane to sharply criticizing Secretary Hegseth. And friends, This is where the alarms start ringing. According to Peters, Hegseth has failed to live up to the very values Kane just laid out. Instead of stability, he's brought chaos. Instead of accountability, he's delivered cover-ups. Instead of inspiring confidence, he's spread fear, driven away advisors, and undermined trust. That's not leadership. That's surrender. And when the Secretary of Defense, the civilian head of our entire military, is accused of these kinds of failures, every American ought to pay attention. Because we're not talking about a boardroom. We're talking about American lives. Peters didn't just raise policy disagreements. He questioned whether Hegseth was ever qualified for the job. He compared it to hiring someone with no experience to run a Fortune 500 company. Except here, the stakes aren't profit margins, they're life and death. No board of directors would risk billions on an unqualified CEO. Why, then, should the United States risk its sons and daughters, its national security, on untested leadership? That's a fair question. And for those of us who believe in competence, discipline, and accountability, it cuts to the heart of what it means to lead. Let's go through the list Peters laid out, because this is where it gets serious. Firing qualified leaders without cause, creating a vacuum at the very top of the chain of command. Forcing loyalty tests, the hallmark of political purges, not professional militaries. Driving out or firing 5 senior advisors in a climate of fear. Sharing classified details about Yemen operations on Signal, an unsecured messaging app, with unauthorized individuals. Not once, twice. Revoking personal protection details for Mark Esper and Mark Milley, even though they still face threats from Iran. Now, pause and think about that. Our leaders, who once faced hostile adversaries, suddenly left without protection. Sensitive operational details casually shared on apps that foreign spies could intercept. What does that say to our troops? What does that signal to our enemies? That's not strength. That's recklessness. Here's the part that struck me most. Peters reminded Hegseth of his own words during nomination. If you're a rifleman and you lose your rifle, they're throwing the book at you. Every enlisted soldier knows this is true. Lose a weapon, lose classified documents, fail in your duty, you pay the price. The standard is strict, and for good reason. Accountability protects lives. But when leadership fails, what happens? When the ones at the very top violate their own rules, share classified information, or undermine trust, where's the accountability then? Should the private on patrol be punished while the secretary walks free? That's not justice. That's hypocrisy. And hypocrisy at the top erodes the very discipline that makes the U.S. military the most effective fighting force in history. Where's the accountability? That's the question every American deserves an answer to. Now, there's an ongoing Inspector General investigation into Hegseth's use of Signal. That means there's still a process playing out. But when asked how he would show accountability if found guilty, Hegseth dodged. He called it hypothetical. Here's the truth. Leadership isn't about hypotheticals. It's about responsibility. If you claim to hold others accountable, you must hold yourself accountable too. Our troops don't get to shrug off mistakes as hypotheticals. They pay the price. Shouldn't their leaders do the same? We cannot ignore the backdrop here. While Israel and Iran edge toward open conflict, while Russia and China sharpen their knives, America cannot afford weakness at the top. Our adversaries watch everything. They exploit every crack. And if they see a Defense Department divided, disorganized, and riddled with scandal, they will use it against us. Strength teeters. Weakness invites attack. It's that simple. So when our leaders fail to project strength and accountability, they're not just failing in Washington. They're risking lives in Jerusalem, in the Taiwan Strait, in the Persian Gulf, and beyond. So let's contrast again. General Kane, servant leadership, constitutional duty, nonpartisan commitment. Secretary Hegseth, accusations of recklessness, disorganization, and lack of accountability. Which one do you want leading America's armed forces in a time of global crisis? Leadership is not about slogans. It's not about appearances. It's about trust, responsibility, and sacrifice. Leaders eat last. Leaders carry the weight. Leaders take the fall when things go wrong. That's what makes the American military the envy of the world. Not technology, not firepower, but the culture of discipline and accountability. When that breaks down, everything else crumbles. So where do we go from here? As patriots, we demand accountability. Not for revenge, not for politics, but for the preservation of liberty and the safety of those who serve. Because if a private is punished for losing his rifle, then a secretary must be held accountable for losing the trust of the nation. Because if a general can swear to uphold the Constitution, then every civilian leader must do the same. Because if our troops are willing to bleed and die for this flag, then their leaders must be willing to stand with integrity under its stars and stripes. This isn't about left versus right. This is about strength versus weakness, responsibility versus recklessness, honor versus hypocrisy. And America deserves nothing less than honor. This is America Viewpoint, where we don't whisper, we roar. We stand tall, speak loud, and never back down from defending truth and liberty. If this message fired you up, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the fight for America doesn't end when the video does. Until next time, stay strong, stay free, and may God bless the United States of America.